The day Victor Langley coldly removed my promotion file from the meeting agenda, he thought I would stay quiet the way I had for years. He did not know that the woman who had kept an entire freight system alive through snowstorms, wildfires, and client emergencies no longer wanted to beg for a seat at the table. I did not shout. I did not plead. I simply stood up, carried the last piece of my dignity with me, and walked out. But when I left that room, Victor failed to understand that he had just pulled the final pin holding Harborline Freight Systems together. I still remember the cold feel of the leather chair beneath my hands that afternoon. Victor Langley sat across from me with the tired expression of a man pretending a decision had weighed heavily on him. But it was not his face that chilled me. What made everything inside me go still was the way he pushed the folder across the desk without meeting my eyes. That folder had once been described as the final step in my promotion process. For months, I had been told there were only a few details left. Only one more board confirmation. Only the right timing to wait for. Yet when the folder landed in front of me, Victor simply said my promotion review had been removed from the meeting agenda. No real apology. No honest explanation. Not even the minimum respect owed to the woman who had spent nearly her entire professional life keeping that company from falling apart. I did not scream. Even though something in my chest broke into very small pieces, I did not ask the same question again and again like someone begging for mercy. I only looked at him and realized, for the first time in 15 years, that my silence had been mistaken for submission. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every emergency call after midnight had been reduced to one careless sentence. Victor believed I would bow my head as usual. He believed I would swallow the insult, return to my desk, and keep rescuing the problems he was never competent enough to manage. But in that moment, I was no longer the woman waiting to be chosen. I had become the woman ready to choose her own path. 15 years at Harborline Freight Systems was not a small number to me. It was not just a line on a human resources file. It was a portion of my life paid for with energy, youth, health, and far too much faith. I joined that company when I still believed that if a person worked hard enough, stayed steady enough, and behaved decently enough, their value would eventually be seen. I believed the corporate world still had room for people who rose through real ability without flattery, without power games, and without turning themselves into pieces on someone else's political board. I arrived earlier than most people, left later than many. And when others turned off their phones on weekends, I kept mine close because I knew a single-stranded shipment could cost an entire supply chain millions. I knew the names of long-haul drivers, the habits of manufacturing clients, which roads froze before sunrise, and which carrier could still move under pressure when everyone else had run out of options. During snow seasons, I was not just coordinating trucks. I was coordinating client trust, driver safety, and the company's reputation. When wildfires cut through transport routes, I sat in front of screens for hours, rebuilding delivery networks out of choices that looked impossible. When a major customer was furious because of executive mistakes, I was the one who picked up the phone, bought us time, and turned disaster into a recovery plan. From the outside, people saw Victor in executive meetings. Inside the system, everyone knew I was the one stitching the region together every day. For a long time, I was proud of being the kind of person who did not need to perform importance. I believed results spoke for themselves. That people who truly did the work did not have to stand in the center of the room and announce their value. It was a beautiful belief. But it was also the trap that kept me there far too long. I kept thinking patience was maturity. That Victor's promises only needed a little more time to become real. Whenever he said the regional vice president seat was waiting for final approval, I told myself I only needed to survive one more peak season, one more crisis, one more project. And every time the company hit trouble, I stepped forward again, calmly took responsibility, cleaned up chaos, and shielded my team from blame that belonged higher up. Nathan Brooks once looked at me after a shift that stretched nearly to dawn and said that if I ever left, the whole region would fall like a roof without its main beam. I laughed then because I did not want to admit I knew he was right. Claire Bennett, who had an exceptional analytical mind, was repeatedly dismissed by supervisors simply because she was not part of Victor's favored circle. Owen Ward was quiet and reserved, but he carried more technical coordination knowledge than many senior managers ever bothered to learn. I trained them, protected them, and they trusted me, not because of my title, but because I stood beside them when things were hardest. If you have ever been overlooked, even though you were the person holding an entire team together, comment number 1, so I know you understand that feeling too. There was a long period when hearing people call me the backbone of the region made me feel both proud and uncomfortable. I took it as recognition, a simple compliment for someone who did not need a spotlight. But later, when I looked back, I understood that the phrase had a darker side. A backbone is necessary to everyone, but few people think about it until it hurts or breaks. Harborline needed me in every crisis, but not in the rooms where power was distributed. They needed me when snow buried routes, when clients threatened to pull contracts, when fuel costs shook the operating budget. They needed my analysis, my procedures, my phone calls, and my ability to calm every side of a situation. But when it came time to put my name on a title that matched the work, they suddenly had endless reasons to delay. I was the one who built the winter logistics protocol that saved the company from massive penalties during a brutal storm season. I was the one who renegotiated carrier agreements when fuel prices climbed high enough to tear apart margins. I was also the one who saved a major client after Victor mishandled their account review. Each time, he collected praise upstairs while I returned to my office with a new pile of work. I used to think that was humility. It was not. It was a system learning how to benefit from my dedication without paying the proper price for it. That realization did not arrive all at once. It gathered quietly over years until one afternoon, sitting across from Victor, I finally saw the full shape of it. Victor was very skilled at using kind-sounding words to conceal exploitation. He called me reliable. He said the board appreciated the stability I brought. He used phrases like, "Keep doing what you are doing," with the expression of a man offering encouragement. In the past, I heard those words with a heart that still hoped. Lauder, in memory, they sounded more like ropes. Reliable, in the mouths of people like Victor, means they know you will carry more without demanding more immediately. Stability, in executive language, means you have made their weakness difficult to see. Keep doing what you are doing really means keep enduring. I spent too many years turning exhaustion into responsibility, unfairness into motivation, and disappointment into a reason to try harder. I was afraid that if I stopped, my team would suffer. I was afraid Nathan would face impossible clients alone. Claire would be forced into silence again. And Owen would be given problems no one else understood and then blamed if anything failed. That fear kept me in place longer than my dignity should have allowed. But a woman cannot live forever on the feeling of being needed. Being needed is not the same as being valued. Being depended on is not the same as being respected. If this story makes you realize you have also been trapped in the role of the person everyone cannot function without, please like this video, because someone else out there may need to hear this today. Sometimes the first step toward freedom is admitting that usefulness has been mistaken for worth. My final meeting with Victor had been scheduled months in advance. On the digital calendar, it had a polished title, final review, and transition planning. That phrase alone made me allow myself to believe one more time. I imagined sitting down, hearing him confirm the new title, and calmly discussing authority, compensation, responsibilities, staffing, and regional expansion. I had even prepared a thank you, even though deep down I knew I should not have to thank anyone for something I had earned long before. That afternoon, I walked down the hallway to Victor's office with the tension of someone about to step through a new door. I wore the brightest blouse I owned. Not to impress him, but to remind myself that I deserved to enter that room with confidence. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Victor did not stand. He did not smile. He did not use the eager tone he used when he needed me to fix a crisis. He only looked down at his papers, tapped his pen against the desk, and told me to sit. The air in that room felt thick and cold, as if the outcome had been decided long ago and I had only been invited to hear the sentence. When he began talking about budgets, timing, economic pressure, and strategic priorities. I heard every word clearly. But beneath those words, I heard something even clearer. They had never truly intended to put me in that seat. They had needed me close enough to carry the work, but not high enough to claim the authority. I asked Victor whether, if the title was being delayed, compensation would at least be adjusted to match the responsibilities I had already taken on. It was a reasonable, calm, professional question. I was not asking for special treatment. I was asking for consistency between the work I was doing and the way the company paid me for it. Victor looked away immediately. He said the board wanted roles and pay to remain aligned with the current organizational structure. I remember watching his hand as he said it. His fingers tapped the edge of the desk. Uneven and unnatural. He was reading from a script. And that was the most humiliating part. Not because I was being denied. I had lived long enough in corporate environments to know things did not always unfold as planned. What hurt was that they did not even respect me enough to tell the truth. If they had said they did not want to pay me, at least I would have known where I stood. If they had admitted they wanted to keep me in my current role because I was too useful at too low a cost, I could have despised them clearly. But they chose vague language. They turned exploitation into organizational structure. They turned a broken promise into a timing issue. Then Victor said I would be first in line when the role opened again. First in line. I had heard that phrase so many times it no longer meant anything. In that moment, I understood that I was not standing before a temporarily closed door. I was standing before a wall they had built out of my own patience. I left Victor's office without making a scene. I did not slam the door, did not say anything cruel, and did not let him see tears. Maybe that was what reassured him. People like Victor often mistake calm for acceptance. He did not know that inside me, a rope had snapped. Not the kind of snap that makes a loud sound, but the quiet, clean kind that cannot be tied back together. I walked back to my office, closed the door, sat in front of my screen, and looked at the folders I had built over the years. Emergency procedures, alternate carrier lists, winter route maps, client recovery scripts, risk assessment tables. All of them were traces of a working life stored in the system as if they had appeared naturally. I used to look at them with pride. That day, I looked at them as evidence. Evidence that I had done far more than my role required. Evidence that Harborline had taken far more than it had paid for. Evidence that the promised promotion had not been a reward waiting for me, but a hook kept in front of me, so I would keep moving. I opened my email not because I wanted to work, but because I needed something to hold on to before I came apart. In my inbox, I saw old recruiting messages, invitations to talk, and people who had told me I deserved better than that place. If you are following this story and want to hear how I walked out of the company that underestimated me, subscribe to the channel now so you do not miss what happened next. Among those emails, one message made me stop for a long time. It was from Grant Coleman, CEO of Northstar Logistics. I knew his name already, not because of loud publicity, but because in the freight industry, people mentioned Northstar with a mix of respect and caution. That company had not grown through luck. It had grown through technology, speed, operational discipline, and the ability to attract strong people who had been wasted elsewhere. The subject line was very short. Would you be willing to talk? I opened it, and within the first few sentences, my throat tightened. Grant wrote that he had followed my operational strategies for years, that several of Harborline's stability models had become reference points inside Northstar's training program, and that if I ever wanted to lead at a higher level, they had a vice president seat that required exactly my kind of operational instinct. There were no vague promises, no request to wait a little longer, no carrot dangling in front of me. Just a decision-maker saying plainly that he saw my value. I placed my hands on the keyboard and felt my fingers tremble slightly. Part of me felt as if I were betraying Harborline. And then I immediately became angry at that feeling. After everything they had just done, why did I still feel guilty for considering leaving? Maybe loyalty, when misused for too long, becomes a soft chain. But another voice inside me was clearer and stronger. It told me I was not betraying anyone. I was simply stopping the betrayal of myself. That distinction mattered. For the first time all afternoon, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt possibility. I replied to Grant while fear was still standing right behind me. I wrote that I appreciated him reaching out and that I could meet that weekend if he still had time. The message was so short it almost looked cold. But to me, it was bigger than any speech. I pressed send before old habits could pull me back. A part of my mind immediately began building the usual questions. What if this was a mistake? What if Harborline changed its mind? What if Victor truly had only been waiting for the right timing, but those questions no longer had enough power to convince me? That afternoon, I had seen the truth in Victor's eyes. I had seen avoidance, calculation, and the comfort of a man who believed I had no better option. Less than an hour after the meeting, after 15 years of loyalty had officially expired, Grant replied. He invited me to Northstar headquarters the next morning and ended with a sentence that made me sit very still. I have been waiting for your yes. Not waiting for me to prove more. Not waiting for me to accept less. Not waiting for an invisible board to grant permission. Just waiting for me to say yes. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my office. Neat files, packed calendars, planning boards I had built myself. Everything that once made me feel important now made me realize how trapped I had been. Harborline was no longer my professional home. It was the place where I had stayed too long because I confused familiarity with worthiness. The next morning, I walked into Northstar Logistics headquarters feeling strange, both nervous and relieved. The building stood near the technology district. Bright, clean, full of glass and natural light. It did not smell like stale coffee, old paper, and quiet stress the way Harborline always did. As soon as I reached the reception desk, the receptionist smiled and called me by name before I even introduced myself. That small detail alone told me I was entering a place that had prepared seriously for this meeting. Grant Coleman met me outside the conference room. He was not flashy or overly warm, but his eyes were focused. He shook my hand and said he was glad I had come in a voice that did not sound like polite filler. It sounded like the voice of someone who had actually taken time to understand me. Inside the conference room, a thick file sat in front of him. When he opened it, I saw process diagrams I had created, performance models, and risk analyses that Harborline had treated as if they were ordinary assets. Grant did not use them to flatter me. He analyzed them like someone who understood the real value of the work. He said I had built stability for Harborline. But because my leadership was so visible, people like Victor would never want to give me true authority. Hearing an outsider state, so plainly, what I had denied for years made me feel both wounded and lighter. At Harborline, everything was half promised, half hidden, half explained. In that room, the truth was placed on the table without decoration. I no longer had to translate vague language into hope. I only had to listen and recognize that I was worthy. When Grant pushed the contract toward me, I looked at it longer than necessary. Not because I doubted what was written there, but because I was not used to a proposal being that clear. Regional Vice President of Operations. Full authority to build my team. Compensation at the top end of the industry. Performance equity. No sentence said it would be reviewed later. No note depended on a vague board discussion. No wording kept me waiting. Everything was specific, direct, and accountable. I asked Grant why me, even though I had started to know the answer. He looked at me and said simply that I had already been doing this job for years. I had only lacked an environment brave enough to call my ability by its proper name. That sentence touched a part of me Harborline had numbed. For years, I had grown used to explaining, proving, restraining myself, and waiting. I had grown used to feeling grateful just to be considered. But at Northstar, I was not being considered as a backup option. I was being chosen as a strategic asset. I picked up the pen and signed. And when the ink touched the page, I did not feel as if I were betraying my past. I felt as if I were freeing my future. After I signed, Grant shook my hand again and said that if I knew strong people being wasted at Harborline, he would be willing to talk with them. I immediately thought of Nathan, Claire, and Owen. I did not promise to bring anyone over, but I knew a simple truth. Strong people do not follow titles. They follow respect. On Monday morning, I walked into my new office at Northstar while the city was still soft with early light. The room was not enormous, but it belonged to me in a way my old office never truly had. The desk was clean. The screens were new. And the window looked out over an operation moving with steady rhythm. There were no overdue reports dropped onto my chair. No morning crisis disguised as a quick favor. No. Victor standing outside my door with a tense expression, ready to hand me a problem and take credit if I solved it. I had barely logged into the system when my personal phone began vibrating again and again. The first notification was a forwarded email from a colleague still at Harborline. It was Nathan Brooks's resignation letter, submitted early that morning and effective in 2 weeks. I read every line without surprise, but my heart still sank. Nathan had carried some of the heaviest operational accounts for years without proper recognition. He had been passed over for promotion so Victor could favor people from his own circle. During a shift that stretched to exhaustion, Nathan told me that if I ever left, he would be right behind me. I thought it was only something said in fatigue. It turned out he meant it. A little later, my phone vibrated again. Claire Bennett had resigned too. Her letter was short, Polita, and so cold I could feel years of endurance behind every sentence. Then came Owen Ward, the man who rarely complained but understood the technical coordination system better than half the management team. They did not leave because I pulled them. They left because they finally saw an open door. When Victor's call appeared on my screen, I knew exactly what was waiting on the other end. I let it ring one more time before answering. Not out of revenge, but to remind myself that I was no longer controlled by his urgency. Victor's voice came through tight and sharp, like a man trying to stay calm after losing the ground beneath his feet. He asked what was happening, why 3 senior employees had resigned on the same morning, and whether I had spoken to them. I kept my voice steady. I told him they were adults and had the right to choose their own futures. Victor reacted immediately, as if I had confessed to a conspiracy. He called them my people, and that phrase showed me he had never understood loyalty. Nathan, Claire, and Owen did not belong to me. They had never truly belonged to Harborline either. They were talented human beings who had stayed too long in a place that made them smaller. If they trusted me, it was because I respected them when leadership only used them. Victor shifted tones quickly. From accusation to negotiation, he said we needed to revisit my role, that my promotion could be reconsidered, that perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. I looked around my new office, at the sunlight on the glass, at a future no longer hanging from someone else's mouth. I told him that would not be necessary because I had resigned on Friday evening and was now vice president at Northstar Logistics. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to almost hear panic spreading through him. Victor tried to regain control by reminding me that Northstar was Harborline's competitor. I answered that it was also the place that had offered me the respect Harborline never had. I did not raise my voice, because I had learned that truth does not need volume to hurt. He said I could not take his team. That sentence felt both bitter and absurd. His team, the people he had overlooked, blamed, delayed, overworked, and then remembered only when they resigned. I told him I was not taking anyone. He had pushed them away. He just had not noticed until they walked out the door. I ended the call before the conversation could turn into an old loop. The kind where Victor offered a few promises, and I had to carry the emotional weight of keeping everything polite. This time, I did not preserve his comfort. Over the next few days, updates from Harborline began reaching me through former colleagues. At first, they were only scattered messages. No one knew where the winter routing protocol was stored. A new coordinator did not understand the carrier escalation sequence. A client asked for a contingency plan, and the person assigned to answer had no idea where to begin. I read the messages and set my phone down. Not because I lacked compassion, but because I knew this was inevitable. A system held up by the knowledge of undervalued people does not collapse. The second they leave, it cracks first. Then the cracks connect. Finally, everyone realizes the foundation was never in the executive chairs. It was in the people those executives failed to respect. Operational collapse rarely begins with an explosion. It begins with an email no one answers on time, a shipment arriving later than promised, a client asking a question the replacement does not know how to answer. At Harborline, those small gaps quickly became deep holes. Within days, a major manufacturer experienced a serious delay because a new coordinator did not know the alternate route I had designed several winters earlier. That mistake triggered penalties, emergency meetings, and a loss of trust I had once quietly prevented. Then the on-time delivery numbers began to drop. Departments started blaming each other. The people who remained had to work harder while no one had enough experience to lead them. Victor, who had once believed operations were just spreadsheets and phone calls, that now had to face the truth that processes do not run themselves. People run them. Experience runs them. Trust between the people inside a system is what makes it move smoothly. At Northstar, I watched from a distance while focusing on our expansion plan. Grant did not encourage me to celebrate Harborline's pain. He only asked what resources I needed to guide my new team in the right direction. That difference made me even more certain I had chosen correctly. At my old company, I had always needed permission to fix problems other people created. At my new one, I was given authority to build before problems happened. The messages kept coming. More resignations, more angry clients, more confused managers. I did not feel happy about it. I only saw a truth finally becoming visible. They had never understood what they had. The following week, Harborline's situation was no longer just internal disorder. It began showing in the market. A client sent a formal review citing unstable service quality. 2 more coordinators resigned because they were overloaded and no longer believed in leadership. Victor hired an expensive consulting firm to stabilize the process. But it was like buying a map after burning every person who knew the road. No one can recreate 15 years of experience by reading a few folders. What I knew was not only written on paper, it lived in memory of every client, every driver, every informal agreement, every small warning sign that a route was about to fail. It lived in late-night calls when I knew who needed reassurance, who needed pressure, how long to wait, and exactly when to change course. Harborline's executives had mistaken all of that for work habits. In reality, it was organizational capital. But they had allowed it to stay attached to people they did not value. When Nathan, Claire, Owen, and I left, we did not take trade secrets. We took ourselves. And that alone was enough to shake the system. I heard Victor had started staying late in the office, trying to reread procedures and asking remaining employees about decisions he had never bothered to understand before. I did not hate him enough to wish him suffering. But I was no longer sympathetic in a way that would send me back. Some lessons only arrive when there is no one left to shield people from consequences. Harborline was paying an old bill, and my name was no longer on the line responsible for settling it. When Victor called again later, the arrogance I knew was gone from his voice. It was lower, softer, and full of desperation he could not fully hide. He said the company needed me back. Not wanted. Needed. Clients were threatening to pull contracts. Regional operations were losing control. More people had resigned. He said the board was prepared to reinstate the vice president role immediately, raise my salary significantly, provide real equity, and give me complete operational authority. I listened and felt no anger anymore. Only a quiet irony. Just a few weeks earlier, all of those things had been unsuitable for the budget, poorly timed, and impossible within the current structure. Now that the system was falling apart, they had suddenly become possible. I asked whether he remembered what he had said in our meeting. Victor replied that circumstances had changed. I said yes. They had changed because the people who kept the company functioning had finally left. He went quiet. Then said, I had built that region. That Harborline could not run without me. And that I should at least meet with them so they could make it right. But some mistakes cannot be repaired with a late invitation. The issue was not only the title. It was not only the money. It was not only the equity. The issue was that they saw my value only after they lost access to it. I looked out over Northstar's operations yard. where trucks moved through a system being built on trust. I told Victor I was exactly where I needed to be. And the people who had trusted me were growing here too. Harborline had not lost us that month. They had lost us years earlier when they chose convenience over fairness. Months later, Harborline's story was no longer just industry gossip. It became an example discussed at conferences, in analysis pieces, and in conversations among operations leaders. People studied the collapse like a clear case file. Leadership had mistaken loyalty for endless endurance, silence for satisfaction, and human competence for software that could be replaced. Analysts traced each mistake backward and eventually reached the same root. Harborline did not collapse because I left. It collapsed because it had built an entire system on the backs of people it did not know how to keep. At Northstar, my world expanded in a way I had once been afraid to imagine. I led a larger team, had hiring authority, controlled resources, and had a voice in strategy. Nathan quickly proved he deserved a higher-level role. Claire produced analytical models that immediately caught the attention of senior leadership. Owen was given authority to improve the coordination infrastructure, instead of being treated as the person who only fixed emergencies. Watching them grow taught me that sometimes people do not lack ability. They lack a place bright enough for that ability to be seen. Former Harborline clients began approaching Northstar, quietly at first. Then, more openly. They said they wanted stability, transparency, and a team that listened. Each new contract did not make me gloat. It simply confirmed something I had learned at a high cost. People do not follow a logo. They follow trust. And trust cannot be purchased with late promises. It is built in the years when no one is watching, through decisions that either honor people or slowly teach them to leave. Nearly a year after Victor removed my promotion file from the meeting agenda, I was invited to speak at a regional leadership forum. The room was filled with mid-career managers, tired faces, with hope still behind their eyes. People who reminded me of who I had once been. I did not tell my story as an act of revenge. I told it as a warning. I told them to document every promise, to watch what leadership does, instead of clinging to comforting words, and to understand that when a company keeps delaying your future, it may be telling you that it does not see you in that future at all. After the talk, a woman approached me and asked how I knew it was time to leave. I told her I knew when staying became more expensive than walking away. Expensive in health, expensive in self-respect, expensive in years. I could never recover. When I look back now, what stays with me is not Victor's panic or Harborline's decline. What stays with me is clarity. Loyalty is beautiful only when it moves both ways. If only one side is always sacrificing, it is no longer dedication. It becomes self-betrayal. My strongest revenge was not a scheme or sabotage. It was refusing to keep saving a place that had never been willing to save me. If you are being undervalued, begin by writing down the promises made to you, updating your professional profile, speaking with someone who truly sees your worth, and imagining a life where you no longer have to ask for respect. Thank you for watching the video until the end. If this story touched you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And remember that sometimes the door you are afraid to walk through is where your self-respect begins to live again.